Well, this week on Sky News ClimateCast, you find me in very stylish surroundings. We're talking bone china, we're talking silver, we're talking your little pinky out as you drink your cup of tea. Because I am at Fortnum and Mason's. Many people think of it as the home of the afternoon tea. It has another claim to fame, which is that it says that they invented the scotch egg here, and now they're taking it a step further, because they want to be the first place that's tried using cultivated meat. That is still meat that's grown from animal cells, but is grown in the lab, not in a farm. And there is a cultivated meat scotch egg right next to me here, and I can't wait to see what it tastes like. But before I do, a question for Hattie Carey, who's a producer in what they call the food studio here. Hattie, why has Fortnum and Mason's done this?
Throughout our 300-year-old history, we are forever learning and evolving. And as you say, we were the kind of inventors of the Scotch egg, but there's also been lots of other firsts that have happened within this building. And so the Food and Drink Studio's purpose is really to help us continue that evolution, to continue learning and educating ourselves about the kind of technologies and innovations happening in the world, and see if we can be at the forefront of some of them and champion people who are doing incredible things in the industry.
And you think cultivated meat might be a big next step to think about?
Absolutely. Meat is something that is an incredibly hot topic at the moment for a variety of different reasons, but the main one being obviously sustainability and the environment. Sustainability is something that's absolutely one of our core pillars. We are royal warrant holders here at Fortnum's, and there's some very strict criteria around the meat that we source and where it comes from. And whilst we're incredibly proud of the amazing producers that we work with, we also want to learn about people who are doing other things and tackling these problems in a variety of ways. And cultivated meat is certainly new to us, but it could really be what the future looks like, and we want to sort of to learn that and discover it.
Well, here is the Scotch egg itself. It's quite a dainty small one. It's probably about 4 centimetres across. I've cut it in half and revealed, the perfect meat surround and bright orange yolk, a little thin bit of white around it. The egg, is it a hen's egg or is it something else?
No, this is a quail's egg. We wanted it to be sort of bite-sized. We were imagining what would it look like on our afternoon tea tower? What would it look like at one of our events as a canapé? So this is a quail egg-sized egg with the cultivated meat. And in this particular case, the meat that Ivy Farm have produced is beef. Our traditional recipe would be using pork. But as you'll see when you bite into it, it's that beefy flavour certainly comes through.
Well, I am going to bite into it, but before I do, we're going to go off to see that Ivy Farm that Hattie has just mentioned, to see how they produced the meat that is around this egg. I'm now on the farm where that meat came from, on the outskirts of Oxford, but this is less of a welly, muddy, windy place than a hairnet, shoe cover, lab coat and bright white place, because this, as you may have guessed, is cultivated meat, and this is the lab where that extraordinary advance in our livestock culture begins. And I'm with Rowan Rimington, who's one of the guys behind this. Rowan, what's your actual title here?
So I'm Head of Cell Sciences here at Ivy Farm. So I'm here to provide some scientific leadership, to all of the scientists who are developing this process.
And you say cell science. So just like with us, we began with tiny cells. I'm guessing with cultivated meat it all begins at a cellular level as well.
It does indeed, yeah. So our teams, we map the beginning of the process, which involves taking the cells from that first initial tissue sample from the animal, making sure they're the right ones, giving them the right characteristics, finding out what they like to eat, and then, we pass them forward up in scale.
I should say we are in one of these sort of classic modern bright white labs. There are some rooms here which I'm not allowed to go into for sort of biosecurity reasons, with various bits of biotech happening behind them. But just before we get into that, you said the tissues from animals. What animals and how are you getting that initial tissue?
So we've worked with a variety of species. Mainly pig and cow. Within cow, we've done several breeds, so Aberdeen Angus, which we all like the beef burgers from, and Wagyu also is a more premium variety. We have also done other animals, such as chicken, duck, and venison, but we're really focused on pig and cow in terms of our primary product development. And those first pieces of tissues right there, skeletal muscle and fat tissues from the animal.
And how did you get them?
We work exclusively with either high welfare farms or commercial partners. And when their animals are going into the food chain, so they are going to an abattoir, we will be there and we will obtain our first piece of tissue there. So we add no additional slaughter of animal to build our process.
Once you've got that sample, you have to go back, or is that it?
No, that's absolutely it. And it's one of the most powerful parts of a cultivated meat process, is that all we need is one sample, one time, from one animal, and we can produce meat from that breed or species forever.
What actually happens in this room? I mean, I can see a lot of test tubes and a few people working away.
So here we're in our molecular analytical suite, and this is where we do most of our learning about the cells. So it's really important that we understand what they are, how they like to behave, what they like to eat, and this is really where we hone and train them, and we make sure that they've got the right characteristics which we need to support our process optimally.
So presumably it's a lot more complicated than getting a small chunk of tissue off a recently deceased animal and then just growing it up. I mean, what is it you're kind of looking for, making sure of in this suite here?
When we obtain that first piece of tissue, you could get anywhere from it upwards of 40 million cells. And when we're really looking for a needle in that haystack, it's maybe 1 to 3%. And we're looking for the cells which have got this innate capacity to continue growing.
Is that what we call stem cells?
It is generally termed a stem cell.
And the point about those for you is that they carry on growing.
Yes. So they have this defined capacity which is innate to them. It's part of their characteristics that they will continue to grow and replicate and regenerate each other. So they're a great starting material for us.
There's another room off here with a very complicated robot thing going on, which I think is to do with matching the cells with the feed, with the food medium they're going to get.
Yep, that's it. So just like us, again, cells, they have a diet which they require: protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, fats. And we have this robot here at Ivy Farm which enables us to screen these components in high throughput in an automated fashion. And so really what we're trying to find out here is what the cells like to eat and in what quantity. So it's diet optimization. And
so the next stage, you have to let your babies leave you?
Yep, absolutely. We will reluctantly then pass them on, and the lucky receipt of those is our Director of Manufacturing, Ben Kinder, and he'll take them up and scale.
Let's go and see him. So I've walked into the pilot plant for the large bioreactor, and I'm surrounded by a maze of stainless steel. There are pipes of different bores, there are different vats, there are different chambers, there are dials, there are really all sorts of containers here. And as was mentioned, this is Ben's place. Ben, what is happening in here?
So this is the, like I said, the pilot manufacturing facilities. So you're right, you're surrounded by stainless steel production vessels, stainless steel pipes, very similar to any other large-scale food or beverage production facility, and actually very similar to a craft brewery.
Oh, okay, beef and beer, you're talking my language. Rowan's passed you on some cells and you're beginning to grow them up. What happens next?
So the next stage of the process, we take the right cells and we take the right media, so that's the nutritional formulation for the cells, and then we put the two together, we give them the right physical conditions, so in terms of the stirring, the temperature, amount of oxygen, and then we leave them alone. They start to grow, they start to multiply, and then we end up with a lot of beef, either pure muscle or pure fat.
And what I love about this place is that these containers have clear walls. I can see a glass vessel here about half the size of a golf bag. There's some spinning light brown liquid in it. What's going on in there, Ben?
So this is one of our 20-litre bioreactors. The term bioreactor sounds complicated. Essentially what it is a mixing vessel. So in here we've got, like I say, our nutritional medium, and we've got our cells, and that culture will start off as a transparent liquid, and over time that will then start to get more and more hazy and cloudy as the cells grow and multiply and the population essentially increases.
And what animal cells are growing in there?
So at the moment we've got beef growing right in front of your very eyes.
That's extraordinary. As I say, I'm looking at what would be a sort of, like, imagine a large, deep bucket full of beef spinning around pretty rapidly, actually. And you said it was clear when it first arrived, and it's gone to this kind of pretty light, slightly opaque brown in how long?
So this part of the process takes 3 to 4 days. Our total process from start to finish is around 3 weeks. So if you compare that to conventional agriculture, to rear an animal, 9 to 12 months, tremendously more efficient.
I don't think I've actually seen Well, I have seen beef going in front of my eyes because I have seen calves and I have seen cows, but I've never seen it growing like that. So you say it's actually growing, so it starts clear, and as it gets darker, is that because the sort of cells are aggregating or clumping or something?
Yeah, that's part of it. So as the culture progresses, it will grow darker just because there are more cells in there. So the herd's increasing, if you like. And then as over time, as they start to connect and touch one another, they might start to form clumps. And then even with the naked eye, you can see then kind of chunks, if you like, of beef in that vessel, ready to move on to the next stages and eventually into a kitchen.
We've walked over to another stainless steel vessel, and this is your big one, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the vessel that we affectionately call Big Betty. She's a 600-litre fermenter.
So Big Betty is the kind of shape, but a little bit smaller than a silage bale you'd see in a field. That sort of size, a little bit smaller. Now, lots of pipes going in and out. What's going in? What's coming out?
So essentially it's exactly the same as the process you saw at the smaller scales. So in the vessel will be the starter culture of cells that we've moved on from one vessel to another. So think, moving a population or a herd of animals from a smaller pen to a larger pen, and then the nutrition media. And we leave the two in the right controlled conditions, and then after 3-4 days, we end up with a beef that's ready to recover and harvest, and then we can turn into delicious products.
Do you think you have life in that stainless steel container?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we are genuinely, cultivating cells, and they're replicating, they're dividing, so they're doing all of those things that they would do in a living animal, just without the conscience and the skeleton and all of the bits that we don't need.
Does that give you sort of pause for thought at all, or do you just say, well, there's life in a beer fermenting place?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. It's sometimes it's easy to forget kind of how miraculous really this process is, but you are completely right in your analogy around beer. So it's a similar reaction, if you like, where those yeast cells would multiply and divide in that fermentation vessel. This is exactly the same, just with beef cells.
So once it's finished in here, what's it like? What's coming out? Am I going to see a chunk of meat, like something I'd recognise on my plate?
We're a few years away from fillet steak falling out of the bioreactor, but what you do get is a product very akin to mincemeat. So we can then incorporate that product in traditional kind of food processing systems to produce things like sausages or meatballs, burgers, gyozas, all those products that you're very familiar with, and we can very easily substitute in cultivated meat for conventional.
And how does it feel to be part of all this?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's, to truly be part of one of the next stages of society in terms of our food ecosystem. We're reducing environmental impact by 92% in terms of carbon emissions and water and land use, as well as just creating a better future for children, as cheesy as that sounds.
What would you say to livestock farmers listening?
Well, I think this is a process that can replace the worst of farming, if you like. So where we've got very intensively reared agriculture, animals, not in good conditions, what we're not aiming to do is kind of push out the best of British, if you like. And the farmers that cultivate the Sunday roast joint that you'd have on your table, we're not there yet as an industry. What we're looking to do is make a real impact with intensive, low quality, low standards farming.
The plight of farmers is just one of the opposing arguments to lab-grown meat. Many are concerned this could take away their livelihoods and question the quality of the meat being produced. But there are other concerns too. The technology hasn't even been approved yet by the Food Standards Agency, and some European countries, like Italy, are trying to ban it before it even comes to that. And some experts still have beef with the idea.
I'm John Dooley. I'm the project manager at the Royal Agricultural University, project managing a research project entitled Cultured Meat and Farmers. The project itself is looking at the potential impact, threats and or opportunities for the farming community from cultured meats. Some of them see it as a threat. So, for example, the dairy farmers are looking at if it becomes floods the cheap end of the market, it could have a potential impact on them selling cull cows into that market. Whereas some of the other farmers are saying, well, if it becomes part of the cheap end of the market, that could be a USP for us as producers of good quality, what they're referring it to as real meat, and they can sell that at a premium Myself, personally, I can see the benefits of cultured meat. If it becomes a cheap product and it's there to ensure food security and also reduce the risk of animal welfare. But equally, I can see the issues for farmers in general if they suddenly lose their livelihood. The evidence would sort of suggest that it probably is an alternative to meat, whether it is a fully carbon neutral and net zero alternative to meat is still up for debate.
But what does the public think?
I would try lab-grown meat because I'm conscious of how farming meat affects the environment.
It's full of chemicals and it's not natural. So, yeah, it's a hell no from me.
I'm going to eat beef. I'd rather it be out in the field eating healthily.
I just don't like the idea of it. I think it sounds weird.
Whether we like it or not, our enormous global meat industry is facing growing concerns over its emissions. Meat and dairy account for around 14% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. And there's a lot of pressure to change our diet. Well, we can't end the podcast without actually trying this one of a new kind of scotch egg. So let's go and have a taste.
We're back at Fortnum and Mason's. Quick slurp of tea from my china cup. Before the main event. Well, here is the scotch egg. Let's see what it's like. Have you had it yourself, Hattie, already?
I confess that we did do one trial run yesterday, so it was amazing how many chefs within the building suddenly all appeared just as this scotch egg was created. We were cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces to all get a taste of it.
It is quite a significant moment because I understand it is not actually technically legal to sell cultivated meat like this. It's currently unregulated in the UK. I've had to sign various forms to say that I understand that. So it's quite a big moment actually eating it. I must say, just before it goes in, it does smell very meaty. It has that quite strong aroma, and it has the right look in terms of that sort of pinky, reddy, browny mixture you get with a scotch egg. Here we go. A bit of crunch there you might be able to hear from the breadcrumbs on the outside. There is definitely a nice umami feeling about it. There's herbs, there's a bit of onion, but most importantly, there is a meaty flavour too. If someone handed that to me and said, here's a scotch egg, I think that's a really nice scotch egg. I think that was a typical egg surrounded by meat, not particularly surrounded by cultivated meat. And I guess that's the point, is it, Hattie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it would be fascinating in the future to do a blind taste. I think so many people, if they've got the idea of cultivated meat, there's something about it that sounds really sci-fi and this thing of the future that we would never actually have on our plates. But the fact is, it genuinely could be something that becomes really mainstream. And I think at the moment, it's our preconceptions that are holding us back far more than I would say the flavour itself. I was really impressed by what it tasted like and how close it is to the real thing.
Have you got a date in mind when you might begin actually selling this in the shop? You say it's not just up to you, there's sort of regulation that needs to happen. And if so, how much might it cost?
I think it's so much in its infancy that is a conversation for a much, much later date. At this point, what we really wanted to do was educate ourselves about it, understand the kind of wider issue that exists within the industry. You know, Fortnum sources its meat incredibly carefully, but I think we all agree that there is a big problem out there in the industry. Whilst we would all like to eat less meat and better meat, the reality is people are eating as much meat as ever, and a lot of the meat that floods the industry is incredibly poor quality. So this could be something that replaces that. Whether Fortnum's fully embraces it in the future, we'll have to see. There are certainly a few regulations, as you say, to overcome and a few mindsets to change, but to be able to even start dipping our toes in that world and that conversation is incredibly exciting. We're very honoured to be the first people to be tasting it outside of the Ivy Farm lab.
There are two slightly competing pressures here, though. There's the issue about livestock and the impact that they have on the planet. But people are also very worried about processed foods And in a way, this feels by definition more processed than something that grew up on a field and was simply, slaughtered, butchered and minced, which is actually simpler than this process, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we're actually holding a panel talk to talk about many of those things. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're wanting to learn about. What are the cost implications of both rearing the animal versus growing it in a lab? What are the environmental implications? And crucially, as you say, does it develop that same flavour, but is it also falling under the category of being ultra processed by default of it being created in a lab? I mean, I think if we were to examine so much of the food that we do eat in the industry, it is very ultra processed in ways that would probably really alarm us. And I think that the fact that this is actually taking animal cells and just developing them further is probably not ultra processed in the way that we sort of see in so many other examples in the food industry. So that's, hopefully something that at the end of the panel talk we'll be a bit wiser on.
Well, I'm going to finish off with another mouthful here, I think. And it is really fascinating to think that the beef cells that I'm about to consume actually grew in a bioreactor that I saw earlier in a building outside of Oxford rather than a field outside of anywhere. Fascinating.